Hey guys, Haz here at Shield K9. Today we are going to talk about the infamous Salisbury Police K9 incident. K9 handler caught on body camera giving his dog some fairly harsh corrections, and it doesn't look good. So I'm going to go through this video. We're going to watch it. I'm going to point out the things that I notice. Then we're going to determine what it was that actually happened, what they were trying to achieve, what could have been done better. And then we're going to talk about the morality and the ethics of what happened and what should happen moving forward. Now, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to do what everybody else who watched this did. I'm supposed to curse the handler to the depths of hell. I'm supposed to wish every evil and misfortune upon him, because in today's day and age, everybody's a moral and virtuous giant on the internet. They've never made any mistakes or done anything regrettable. And I, on the other hand, try to live by the saying, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And I'm here to tell you guys, as I tell you on a regular basis, I am a sinner. I have made mistakes. I've done things in the past out of ignorance or frustration that I wouldn't do now, right? So I'm going to extend the benefit of that to this individual. Now, does that mean we can't have an ethical and moral conversation about what happened? Does that mean that we can't give the dog the respect that him and every other living creature deserves? No, it doesn't. But it means that we're not going to look at this from the position of moral virtue. We're not going to peer down from our tower, that's constructed through our fake, virtue that we've created so that we can appear to be, superior beings to those around us. I'm not that guy. I am a sinner just like all of you. So that's how I'm going to look at this. But I'm also a sinner that knows how to train dogs. So we're going to talk about this from a professional standpoint. Does that mean I'm going to cut this guy a break? No, it doesn't. It just means that I'm going to be reasonable about it. And I'm not going to proselytize on this video. I'm going to give you guys the straight goods. So let's play this video. All right. The patrol unit's open. That means the dog can leave anytime he wants. This guy's wearing a bite suit. Dog breaks from the patrol unit. This guy yells no. The handler yells no. Dog hits the ground and applauds. Okay. Leashes up the dog. This is where it gets spicy. Lifts the dog up. Okay. Throws the dog over his shoulder. All right.
We're good. No witnesses.
Joker with the camera says no witnesses. He slams the dog into the unit and then forces the dog back into the unit. Watch his arm. Slaps the dog on the head. And then these jokers with the camera are talking about how their cameras aren't on or are on. I don't know. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Maybe they didn't like him all that much. All right. Let's talk about what happened and why it happened. So I'm going to make an assumption about what they're trying to do here. It's important to understand what they're trying to do. All right. And the reason for that is control with a police K9, okay, is really important for obvious reasons that I shouldn't have to really get into. But I will say this. There are a lot of wrongful bites every year by working K9. Now, it seems that the vast majority of the victims are probably assisting officers. So his buddies, his partners, right? Those are the ones that are in the most danger from his dog if he's going to wrongfully bite somebody. That being said, these dogs do, on occasion, get out of control and, bite somebody that they were not supposed to bite, or even a suspect that wasn't doing something that warranted a bite. So controlling these guys is of the utmost importance for obvious reasons. Now, he's left the unit open. Why has he left the unit open? This guy's in a bite suit. So obviously he's playing the role of a potential bad guy, all right? I assume what he's doing is he's approaching a suspicious individual, a suspect, and he's left the unit open so that the dog can be deployed on command or to protect him if this guy attacks him. That's the scenario I'm assuming that they're doing. Now, a lot of departments don't do this. They don't leave the door open, okay? The handler has a button on his hip that if he pushes it, the door will pop open, so a door popper. Or if they want access to their dog, they simply have to let the dog out. They would not leave the door open and then approach somebody. For the most part, again, all departments have their own SOPs, so I'm not familiar with this one, but I'm assuming based on what I'm seeing that this is exactly what it is that they're doing. All right, let's watch some more. Okay, this is when the dog starts to move. This guy's wearing a bite suit. The dog knows what a bite suit is. Dogs aren't stupid, okay? Working canine generally enjoy bite work. He knows what this is. He's probably been on it quite a few times by now. He's in the back of a patrol car, and he's a patrol dual-purpose dog. So I would assume that he's been on one of these a fair few times, and most half-decent working dogs worth their salt enjoy the act of biting on suits and sleeves, okay? Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the position that they're in. So this dog can smell it, and he can see it. And guess what, guys? This might not be the first time they've run this scenario in this place with this guy with that bite suit. So the dog is in a state of expectation. All right. Now, why did the dog jump out? This guy said something to that guy. Quite frankly, if the handler had sneezed, the dog probably would have jumped out of the unit. All right, because he was in a high state of expectation. He was getting ready to rock. This guy, the handler, says no. Now look at his arm. You see his arm? He's holding something on his chest. Now I assume that's probably an e-collar remote. I could be wrong. I don't see an e-collar on the dog. Doesn't mean he's not wearing one. The footage is a little bit grainy. I didn't see the dog react to an e-collar correction. Doesn't mean one didn't happen. I just didn't see the dog twitch or react to one. So the dog may just have reacted to his no. Now, the dog made a mistake here. He jumped out without a command. The handler yelled no, and the dog did the right thing. He laid down. I don't like what happens next, and I'll explain to you why. So he comes to the dog. I'm pretty sure that's an e-collar remote around his neck, by the way. So he comes to the dog. Now he leashes that dog up. Okay. Now, I don't see a pinch collar or a choke chain. Doesn't mean he isn't wearing one. I just don't see it. So what I think what he did was just put the leash on the dog's flat collar, which is probably a 1.5 inch collar. So guess what? You're not really going to choke a dog on that collar. So I guess what he's going for is just the stress of lifting the dog up and throwing the dog over his shoulder, which gives us a hint. It tells us a couple of things. What does this tell us, this thing that he did? Most people don't do that, all right? So you have to understand, like me and you, not me and you, if you don't know anything about dog training and you're mad at your dog, you're going to throw your dog over your shoulder? That's just a weird thing to do. Now, I've heard of throwing your dog over your shoulder. It's an old school thing. So that tells me a couple of things. This guy does not look like an old guy. This is probably his first or second working dog. What you guys don't understand is a lot of police canine handlers don't have actually all that much experience. They go through a few weeks of school, and usually, if they're lucky, they have a training director with more experience that manages all the training. Now, I don't see anybody else here managing the training, so I'm assuming that there's no training director present. Usually, the training director is a member of either their department or a larger department in the area that manages all the surrounding police canine programs. Unfortunately, well, in the last 10 years, a lot of police canine training has vastly improved. There's still a lot of really old school stuff going on that's not very productive. Okay, and this throwing the dog over your shoulder is like something from the 70s and the 80s. So that tells me a little something about what kind of training this guy received. So, is he doing this because he's a bad guy, or is he doing this because someone told him to do this? These guys often do what they're told to do. So maybe he thinks what he's doing is perfectly reasonable, and he was told to do it. I don't know. Now, couple things. This thing he's doing where he throws the dog over his shoulder. If this was a badass dog, he would have had his face ripped up. He would have had his shoulder, ripped up. You do not do this with a dog that's serious. The way the dog reacted to his verbal yell of no, and then the way the dog's reacting to this tells me that the dog is probably not a super serious dog. He's probably, a nice dog who wants to please his handler. Fairly sensitive dog. Why does that matter? I'll explain later. Now, yeah, no witnesses. Anyways, now, this is a bad idea. Okay, the dog's making contact with you. I'm not saying there isn't a time to hang a dog up. Believe me, there are times where it's appropriate to hang a dog up. You don't do it like this. You're going to get hurt if you do it like this, because the only time I really hang dogs up is when they're presenting a danger to me or a danger to somebody else. Okay? When dogs try to make my day a hospital day, which happens from time to time with the type of dogs that we're dealing with, hanging them up is a perfectly viable alternative to having some holes put in me that didn't exist that morning. That being said, I never let the dog make contact with me like this. It's a great way to be injured. So, now this part, bumps the dog into the car. I think he's mad, okay? Throws the dog in the car and then slaps him right on the head. Let's talk about that. So bumping the dog into the car, I mean, I think he's just mad. I don't think there's any viable, reasonable response to that, okay? He didn't like full on body slam him, but he did shove him into the car and then throw him into the hole there. Then he slaps the dog on the head, and I think, again, he's steamed up. He's just trying to make his point, stay in the damn car. Was it a productive correction? No. Now, a lot of people get worried about slapping dogs or using your hand in a correction. That, personally, for me, I don't care how you correct your dog. I only care, was it productive, right? Was it fair? Did the dog understand? And again, I'm coming from the position of a sinner, okay? I have corrected dogs in ways in the past that weren't fair. It's been a long journey to get to where I am, okay? And I still got far to go. And anybody who trains dogs that tells you that they've reached the end of their journey, they should probably stop training dogs. We've all done things, whether it's out of ignorance or frustration, where if you could go back, you would change what you're doing. That being said, I don't outsource my corrections. There's a lot of people, they've got absolutely no problem with you using your hand, with you using a check chain or a leash or an e-collar to correct your dog. The second you use your hand, of course, all of a sudden there's a big problem. Well, let's think about that. A correction is a correction is a correction. It's either, used to suppress a undesirable behavior or to guide the dog into a correct behavior, using it like more in the context of negative reinforcement. Now, usually whacking a dog upside the head is what we would term a punishment. It is designed to create suppression in the dog. So, in this context, is anything productive happening? No. So it's important to be aware of that. Now, what should have happened? Well, let's think about, what do we know so far? We don't know what these two have done in the past. Have they been a fantastic team up till now? Have they got a lot of fines? Have they had a lot of success on the street? Because that is important. It tells us a little bit about their working relationship. Number two, we don't know what this dog's history is. Has he tried to bite somebody wrongfully? Why are they doing this exercise? Are they just doing it to do it? Or are they doing it because they've had a problem with him jumping out of the car and going after people? Again, things are important to know. Obviously, the goal here is greater control of the dog, and the solution is in great question. I don't think any of the solution here is very productive, and it's not particularly clear for the dog, and the pressure put on the dog, in my opinion, is unfair. Not because it is pressure. The cookies and clicker brigade would like to tell you, not that there's anything wrong with cookies and clickers, as long as that's not the only game that you've got. They would like to tell you that any kind of correction or pressure in dog training is unfair, and that's because they want to live in a utopian ideology that doesn't, represent the real world in any capacity, and that's because they don't train dogs to do things like this, right? They're very limited in their scope of what they can and cannot do. But the pressure that you're using in this context needs to make sense, and it's not making sense for the dog. In fact, there's some bad things happening, because when the handler approaches the dog here, what does he do? Like, the dog does a wrong thing, okay? He makes a mistake here. He goes here and he lies down because he knows he did a wrong thing. And the handler's response to, okay, well, you fixed yourself, is he goes and he makes a whole bunch more pressure on the dog. So what's the dog learning? Dog's learning, hey, avoid the handler, because even if I do the right thing, he's still going to come and whoop me. All right? That's not productive for their relationship, and that's not productive for him as a working canine. Here's my problem with all of this stuff, okay? Here's my problem with all of this. This is creating suppression in the dog. So it could fool you, because the dog's going to become more responsive after this. That suppression caused by the stress of this correction, or this series of events, we should say, I wouldn't even call it a correction, is going to make the dog more responsive and more hesitant to jump out of the car. And it's going to trick this guy into believing that he's been successful. But what's actually going to happen is the next time the dog becomes aroused and the incident that happened just now fades from his memory, he's going to make the same mistake because there was no clarity in what actually happened. Okay, now here's the issue. I need a dog like this, just judging by what I saw here from his body language and his behavior. A lot of dogs, I don't care if you yell at me, I don't care if you zap me with your e-collar, or you scream at me or you hit me, I'm going to go bite this guy no matter what, because that's the kind of behavior they have. This isn't one of those dogs. He seems like a nice, kind of middle-of-the-road dog. So what do we need out of this dog? We need him to give his entire self to every task that he's asked to perform, whether it's an apprehension task, a track, or a search for drugs. Okay, I need him to give his entire self to it, because if he doesn't give his entire self to it, I think you're going to see a lot of performance issues. So this stuff that this guy just did is creating suppression, and the suppression is removing the dog's, it's reducing the dog's intensity and his ability to apply his whole self to activities like searching or biting or tracking. And that's a big problem from a working standpoint. And again, nothing productive was achieved. What should have been done? This guy's wearing an e-collar. So let me go out on a limb and assume that the dog has some concept as to what the e-collar is. Okay? So a very simple thing that he could do without this decoy here, because this decoy is a huge motivator for the dog. The dog really wants to bite him. So if you're going to work on this in the beginning, you remove the big conflict, which is this guy, and you work on this away from the conflict. And I, just judging by what I'm seeing here, I very much, and the very kind of old school, weird kind of haphazard training, which is typical from like the 80s and the 90s and even the 70s, right? I'm betting that this didn't happen. They usually just kind of throw the dog into the fire and bang away until, it kind of looks right. That's usually what's happening. And it's, again, we're not blaming this guy, because I don't know. He doesn't look that old. So I'm assuming that he's probably been taught this stuff by people that should know better. But listen, in today's day and age, even if they've got an old school guy running their department's canine program, this guy's still taking the fall. He's getting thrown under the bus, because that's the way it works generally nowadays. Now, what should have been done? Dog's wearing an e-collar. What I would have done is I would first teach the dog to get in the car with the tapping of the e-collar. So you can make a command like, kennel or place, and you tap on the e-collar and guide the dog until he's in the vehicle. Then you stop tapping and reward him. You repeat this a few times. Then you put something high motivation on the ground, like a bite wedge or a ball or something, whatever this guy really loves, and you let him see it, and you let him come out, and you let him bite it a few times. Okay? And then you tell him to go in the car, and you make that thing move around, and when he comes out of the car without command, you start tapping the collar until he gets back into the vehicle. If necessary, you go and physically help him back into the vehicle with leash pressure or collar pressure. And then you stop tapping that e-collar, and he learns that the e-collar goes on when you come out of the vehicle without permission. And you do this until he's reliable, and then when he's a good boy and he's able to stay in the vehicle, guess what you do? You go and you pick up the bite wedge or the ball or the sleeve, and you bring it over here, and you reward him, and then you repeat the exercise, and you basically have him wait in the vehicle, and you go kick that ball around and throw that sleeve around and yell and carry on until he's able to hold himself there. And every time he makes a mistake, you start tapping. You tap the e-collar, tap, 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 kennel or place or whatever command it is that you're using, and you get him back in the vehicle until he learns to control himself and stay in the vehicle with the door open. right? And you always come back to the vehicle and you reward him at the vehicle. And then sometimes once he's being successful, you're allowing him to come out and reward on the object outside. And you're kind of taking him back and forth. Sometimes the reward's here and sometimes the reward's there. And then you do the same thing with the decoy. You go to the decoy, right? And you start yelling at the decoy. And of course the dog's going to jump out and you start tapping on the e-collar and get him back into the vehicle. You might need to go up a little bit on the level there because this is generally a very highly desirable object, and the dog goes back in the vehicle and you continue to work it, and you have the decoy come over and reward the dog at the door, and then you have the dog come out and apprehend the decoy on command, and you kind of go back and forth again until the dog's super clear. You can also do it with a long line and a prong collar, and there's like half a dozen ways to do this exercise in a way where you're putting pressure on a dog, but productive pressure that makes sense, that creates greater clarity in the dog, and that doesn't reduce his deployability. And that's really the most important thing, is we want to keep this guy deployable. We want to keep him operational. We want to keep him at the top of his game. Now, we're getting into the ethics of this, okay? Again, I've already said what I think about this correction of throwing the dog over your shoulder. I think it's a stupid, outdated, useless, non-productive thing, okay? What should happen to the handler? Well, for me, if what he's doing here is the product of bad training that the department gave him, well, I'm just going to send him to better training, and I'm going to take this as a wake-up call for the department and say, hey, we need to up our game. This kind of stuff doesn't fly anymore. And if this is him doing this stuff on his own and not actually violating our training procedures, well, then guess what? He loses his job, right? And if this is him, maybe he's had a lot of bad experiences and done a lot of bad things with this dog, which, judging by the behavior of the dog, I mean, I don't have any reason to believe that. Contrary to popular belief, the dog is not going to be completely traumatized by what happened. He's a working dog, and working dogs tend to be quite resilient. Otherwise, they wouldn't be particularly good at this job. Here's the thing. Every time I do a video on Police K9, some group of idiots always in the comment section goes on about how we shouldn't be forcing these dogs to do these jobs. You don't force a dog to work. You just can't, okay? All the testing that we do for a dog to be a police K9 or, to be a single-purpose detection dog or to be a sport dog, all the testing we do is based on desire. Does he want it bad enough? Do you want that ball bad enough? Do you want that decoy, whether he's in a suit or wearing a sleeve, bad enough? This is all the testing we do to get a dog to the point where he's in the back of a police car, or performing any job is based on the desire of the dog. And if he doesn't have the desire, guess what? He's going to go be somebody's pet. Dogs don't get this job because they don't have desire. Well, some do, but that's because unscrupulous vendors sell, dogs of a lower caliber to departments that don't know any better. But that's another topic altogether. So, am I going to throw this guy in the fire? No, because I don't know him. I don't know his experience and his history with this dog. I don't know this department, and I don't know exactly why they're working on this exercise, right? Now, maybe if I knew all those things and things were still not adding up, then this guy gets the axe. Guess what? He's probably getting the axe anyways. But in today's day and age, when we have conversations about things like this, the people that lead the conversations, like I've always said, are usually the exact wrong people to lead the conversations. They don't have the skills, they don't have the experience, and they usually have big biases and alternate agendas, whether they're social agendas or training agendas or financial agendas. It's important to understand this. Does this mean that we don't respect this dog and we don't do everything we can to make his life better? Yes, it does. Does this mean that, we can all look down from our towers of virtue, whether it's moral virtue or the virtue of being the best dog trainers in the world, and say that this guy is an idiot? I don't think so. So, this probably isn't what a lot of people want to hear. I might lose followers over this. I don't particularly care. This is my opinion. Take it or leave it. If you agree with me, disagree with me, feel free to comment below, like, subscribe, dislike, subscribe, Again, I don't particularly care. This is my opinion on this topic. Dog training is a long journey, guys. It's a long journey, and there's some holes, there's some light places, and there's some dark places. If you want to go places in your dog training, if you want to train high drive working dogs, if you want to train, serious behavior cases and make meaningful results, it's a long and twisting path, and it never, guess what? The journey has no end.